welcome to the Perfect Buyer Presentation, second round with myself, Amy Corr. Thank you so much for joining all of us. And I've got the fabulous Tom Downing joining me today for this 60-minute session where we really want to help you get comfortable with those conversations that we're having with buyers right now, right? Given a lot of the things that are changing and happening in the landscape of real estate, we thought what a great opportunity for us to work with all of you to get really comfortable with a new and improved buyer's presentation.
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite topics. So I'm really happy to be talking about it again this Tuesday.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And Tom has told me many times, this is probably one of the things that he enjoyed the most when he was working and as an agent, as a broker, really kind of tightening up and having such a good buyer's presentation that you really feel like it was a game changer in your business.
No question. I mean, every time we did this and every time that I just spent that 30 minutes with my clients ahead of time, I just really cemented the relationship, had a great outcome, and just made the whole transaction go much smoother. And we could really feel the difference when we did not do it. Those were the times when the transaction just seemed to be much more difficult. So it was just well worth doing.
Yeah, I love the idea that you could tell the difference when you didn't do it versus when you did, right? So today we're going to get everybody dialed in so that walking out of here at 12 o'clock, they're going to be so excited to set up their first 30-minute consultation, right, Tom?
That's right. This is the way it works. We're looking forward to it.
All right, so today what we are going to be focusing on is building your confidence regarding your buyer agency. And making sure that you really realize your worth when it comes to working with your buyers, right? We're going to dive into, and Tom is going to focus on today, the 30-minute buyer interview to build your client confidence, because at the end of the day, a good majority of this is how you feel about presenting this information to a client. And then what we're going to talk about after this as a follow-up is some of the practice opportunities that you're going to have through group roundtables. We're going to have local in your office roundtables where you get to take the information you've learned today and kind of put it into practice. And you know what? It might not feel like the funnest thing to do, but I'm telling you, take the time and get a little uncomfortable. Practice with your colleagues, say it out loud, mess it up out loud, because the more you practice, the more comfortable you are going to get when it comes time to the real moment when you're sitting down with a buyer. And if any of you were on yesterday for our company all call and you heard Michelle McManus, who is such a bundle of energy and just goes after it. You know, she even talked about how many times she felt like she was going to mess it up and how nervous she felt, but that she recognized the minute that she really just put herself in their shoes and tried to be authentic and work with them. She said, you know, the butterflies, she kind of lost those and she was able to get through these buyer conversations. So we encourage you to just do it.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, one of the ways to look at this too, that just makes it really easy in my mind, is we really practice and we do our viewpoint on creating a listing presentation with our clients, and we get to be really good at it. You know, the more we do it, the better it gets. Now, all we're doing is having buyer presentations. It's the exact same thing. The goal is to get to them to sign the contract and to feel good about you. It's the exact same thing. One's listing, one's buying, and we just have two in our wheelhouse now.
Yeah, and Tom and I talk a lot about how, you know, this is something, a bit of an adjustment, and, you know, we're all kind of getting used to really taking this relationship and having these conversations up front with buyers. This is a little bit newer for some of us, but the reality in the long term, this is going to make us such better professionals, and it's going to be really clear to buyers, you know, what they are getting into, that they really understand the value that you're bringing. So while this is a bit of a shift and we're all getting used to it, I think long term, this is really going to allow us to up our game as professionals.
Absolutely.
All right, so what we want to talk about first, and I have to put a call out to Julie Rogers. Thank you for telling me about the changes in my spelling, how to get what you're worth. So we went ahead and did that. So it starts with our conversations as listing agents. What Tom and I talked a lot about is that, yes, today we are going to spend the second half of the class really dialing into your conversations with buyers. But one of the other things we want you all to start thinking about is that when we go on listing presentations and when we're talking with sellers, the conversation about buyer brokerage and buyer agency really starts there. It's about educating our sellers on why having a buyer's broker on the other side is not only going to matter, but it's going to be more effective in getting them to their goal and meeting them at the finish line. So what we want to start with is let's think about having those conversations as list agents and what we want to make sure we are clearly communicating with our sellers. So this is going to give us an opportunity now, in light of really having to talk about compensation and who is getting paid what. The conversation is going to come up much more naturally to talk about agency and to be able to talk about the differences between being an agent for the seller and representing the seller or the listing side versus what a buyer's broker does. And I think as a list agent, it's really important for us to have this conversation comfortably and confidently with a seller to make sure that they really understand that the buyer representation and compensation are both such a critical part of this relationship. You know, sometimes a seller might think if we just move the buyer's agent out, that's going to save me money and be more effective in the long term. We all know as agents the importance of that buyer broker on the other side and just how critical a buyer's broker can be to keep the buyer moving forward, to keep them calm, to make sure that they don't ask for things that are unrealistic and actually get us to closing. So being able to have that conversation with a seller and helping them understand the buy side is so important. The other thing that I think is so critical is making sure that we have this conversation about, you know, what happens if there isn't a buyer's broker on the other side, and making sure that they understand the pros and cons of dual agency and notice of no agency. So this also just really gives us an opportunity to be able to really gives us an opportunity to make sure that we have these conversations. And you may choose in certain circumstances or with certain listings that you are comfortable with dual agency, and that's a choice you get to make in your business. But what we also need to make sure of is a seller really has to understand when you are a dual agent, some of the limitations now that are on their end, because there are things that you will not be able to do in representing them if you're representing both sides. So making sure they're comfortable and clear on that so that together you can make a decision if dual agency is going to work for them. And then if it's not, and you have a buyer that is coming in and does not have a buyer's broker, explaining notice of no agency. And we actually encourage you even bringing the notice of no agency form so that they can see exactly, you know, what still has to happen. If these buyers don't have an agent on the other side, who's going to write up the contract? Who's going to guide them through inspection? Who's going to guide them through attorney review? There's a lot of pieces that a buyer is going to struggle with navigating on their own. So making sure that you're explaining this to a seller, because suddenly it becomes more mindful that actually a buyer's broker could be really helpful for them. And then the other thing is providing documents that they should expect to see from a broker who may be requesting compensation. So we have seen a lot of these, but this is in the instance, and some of you can share in the chat, may have even had this experience already, where a buyer's broker is expecting and has assigned an agreement with their buyer that they are going to receive 2.5% compensation. And if the 2.5 is not presented on the outset for the listing, they may come to us, a listing agent, at the time when they're putting in an offer, right? And they're going to request the difference between what they are expecting to get paid and what may be getting offered. Explaining that to the seller ahead of time, like, we may offer less, but be prepared. We may actually see these compensation agreements, and we're going to need to be ready to figure out how to handle those. And we've got two examples of ones that we have available right now. At Properties, Christie's International Real Estate, we actually went ahead and created our own addendum, which is an addendum for compensation. So when you are submitting an offer with a buyer, this is something that you can include in the event there is a gap between what you have asked the buyer to pay for your services and what's being offered in the listing. And then there's another example of that you can see with the North Shore, with NASBAR, North Shore Barrington Association of Realtors. So getting ahead of it with a seller, just so they know what this new landscape looks like for them. Yes, Tom, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the only thing to remember with this particular form too is you must have a buyer broker agreement in order to submit this form, because references broker agreement, so it's one more reason why, while they may be mandatory coming up soon, it's a great idea to start even now and putting these together, because it allows you to submit this form.
Yep. And so really the idea is when you're going on a listing with a seller, have these forms, the notice of no agency, show them an example of what that means for them in the instance a buyer comes unrepresented, potentially because there's no co-op being offered or a minimum co-op. And then also show them this purchase compensation addendum so that they can see ahead of time before the scenario even takes place. You're already educating them on what may happen in that environment, and it starts getting their wheels turning. And really, we have to remember this is about educating them. They're seeing a lot of headlines right now. And part of this is they just want to understand how this all works now, right? So not coming from a space of being fearful of having these conversations, but being really confident that you're their educator. You're going to educate them on this so they can make a great decision. So let's talk a little bit about how if an offer of no compensation, then what? How is this going to affect outcomes? And again, if you are having a conversation with a seller and they are, questioning whether or not they should offer out a co-op, keep in mind, this isn't them sort of rejecting the idea of offering a co-op. It's more about them being curious about understanding all of their options and how they may or may not impact the success of their sale. So when they're asking, feel really comfortable and just know, and Tom has said this a few times when he's talked to sellers about it. And he said, you know what, if I were in your shoes, I'd be doing the same thing. I'd be asking. It's really confusing out there. There's a lot of headlines, kind of trying to, throw at you different scenarios now about compensation, how you as a seller, pay and what you should be paying for, right? So what you should feel comfortable talking about is if there's no offer of compensation, then how is this going to affect the outcome? So we want to talk a little bit about what we know may happen, right? We've been doing this for a while. We know that the odds are if there's no comp, then it may be where we're going to see more unqualified buyers coming into their home, right? Because buyers are calling direct to the list agent. The list agent doesn't know if they've been pre-approved, doesn't know if they can buy the house, right? They're just calling direct. There might also be a higher likelihood of bargain shoppers, right? Because a buyer may immediately think, okay, if I go direct and there's no compensation for my side of things, then I'm going to get a better deal, right? And we all know that that usually is not the reality. But this is also something before you even list the house, this is that conversation you can have with the seller. There's also a higher likelihood of the property, let's face it, the listing not making it to the closing table. We've all been there. I want you to share in the chat. Has anybody had a listing where there is an unrepresented buyer on the other side? And maybe it's a notice of no agency. You are not doing dual agency. We all know the challenges, right? Because they're emotional. They've never done this before. They're asking for things that sometimes are outside the bounds of what's normal. So there's oftentimes a higher likelihood that this buyer is going to fall out of contract because they really don't know what they're doing and they don't understand the nuances of what it takes to purchase a home, right? And so what we encourage you to do is a lot of us have seen this before. And so when we're talking to a seller, we're not defensive. We're just, again, educating them. And we're sharing these certain things that may be probable if they don't offer compensation. And then we'd encourage you to prepare a few stories. Identify 3 things that you do for buyers to ensure a smooth transition, right? Because we all know that there are things that we do when we're working with buyers to make sure that we get them to closing, whether it's being really good at helping manage the inspection component of it. Maybe it's really good at making sure that they're well qualified before they're even making offers, right? So making sure you can prepare a good story about why and how a buyer's broker really is going to matter. And it's going to end up keeping the first deal together, because we know if something falls apart and it gets relisted, there's kind of that idea of, what may have happened? And it could have been because there was an unrepresented buyer or somebody who wasn't well prepared on the other side. And that becomes a disadvantage for the seller. So these are all things that you can, again, articulate and have a conversation and educate your seller on. And then the other thing too is, if compensation is a factor in the listing, let's talk about that. One of the things that we can see right now is other comparable properties, what the co-op compensation is. So when you're sitting down with a seller, you can say, look, we have these 4 or 5 comps. These are your closest comparables in the market right now. Let's take a look at what their compensation is and what they're co-oping out, and have them see what others in the marketplace are doing so that they can get a better sense of how to make a competitive and right decision for themselves. We can also talk to them about the risks in not offering competitive compensation and how it could impact them negatively. Let's face it, if they are not co-oping out, or if they're co-oping out, let's say 1%, we have to all agree that there may be agents out there who may not be as excited or as quick to show the property because they know that they're going to have to be asking or figuring out how to make sure they get paid for the services they're providing to their buyer. So if that happens, there's a good chance that less buyers agents are going to be incentivized to put their property at the top of the list to show their clients, right? And if it's a low compensation, you're going to just have a lower reduction in the percentage of buyers. Because Tom and I talked about this. You might think one buyer's agent comes in and they've got one client that it could be the perfect house for. But we know that as buyer's agents, they could have 5 clients. And they could go back to their office and they could talk to all of their colleagues about whether or not this is or isn't a great house. So not only are you getting that buyer agent to look at it, but it's all of the ripple effect of their relationships and the connections that they have that your seller might be missing out on if they choose to minimize or eliminate co-op compensation. So again, we started out this session today to talk about just making sure that when we're in front of sellers, the conversation about buyer agency is really critical there too, because, educating them is going to make it easier for all of us as we are trying to navigate both our buyer representation and our list side representation. So making sure you're comfortable with these facts, with these talking points, and getting your head around how to have just really comfortable, educated conversations when you're sitting down and talking to a seller at a listing presentation. Tom, anything to add before we roll into your side of things?
Yeah, you bet. One of the things that has come up in the chat a little bit about this is, it's right now, it's very easy to look in the MLS and say, here's what the compensation is looking like with your competition. We don't know exactly yet the answer to how we're going to be able to be publishing or learning about what's happening there. It's just likely not going to be on the MLS the way it's going right now if it's approved. But there will be ways to figure this out. So we just don't know yet what that'll look like. So that source will be available. We just don't know what the answer is as to when and how we're going to be getting that, but that'll come.
Yeah, like anything that we've done in this business for however many years, when changes come, we figured out how to adapt, right? So to Tom's point, whether it's a portal, where agents can go on and look, it's still to be determined, but it's something obviously we are very mindful of as a brokerage firm as well, to make sure you can be as effective as possible in your day-to-day. All right. So what we want to talk a little bit about is this buyer presentation, right? And Tom talked about this earlier, and we sort of laugh at how much we practice our listing presentation, right? And we practice it because in order to get to yes, we have to have them sign an agreement. So we need to make sure that we handle objections, that we make sure that they clearly understand the value that we are bringing to the table, right? That we've laid out our experience, that we've shown what else we have done to be effective and impactful as a listing agent for them, right? We do all of those things because an agreement has to be signed in order for us to move forward. So now what we are saying is that same mindset is going to happen as we move into representing buyers. And now it's time for you to really focus on polishing your buyer's presentation, because people will pay for value. And so it's, if you don't know it, or if you're figuring out, I need to rework this part of my business, now's the time to do it. You want to show your value and not be afraid to ask for what you're worth. You bring a ton of value to buyers, and you should get paid for your time and energy. So if the other thing is, we laugh and talk a lot about, if you're sitting there thinking, I'm not really good at this right now. Totally okay. If you're not a buyer presentation expert, here's your chance to really become one. And I encourage you, take the time, and after this, go to the roundtables, get uncomfortable, say it out loud, mess up. Just do all of those things that you kind of need to, because practice makes perfect, right? And we really want to make sure that you are armed with all the right things and you feel really confident moving forward when you're focusing on buyers and having these conversations with them.
Absolutely. And I think a couple of things before we just actually get into the buyer presentation itself. One is there's been questions about the length of the contract itself. And one of the we've looked at it very closely. Our attorneys have looked at it, and we will be getting into that in the roundtables, so that we will dig into what's in the document, understanding each of the lines, and just looking at it this way too, is that our listing presentation, I mean, our listing contract is long. You know, there's a lot to get through with it. The buyer contract is also kind of covering everything that we need to do. The other difference that will be with this is that @properties will be supporting these contracts, right? In a way that we can actually say, well, what happens if someone breaches it? We'll get into that in the roundtables, but just know that, you know, as you get through it and as you go through that section, which isn't today, you'll feel much more comfortable with it, and you can talk about each line. Where I used to sell before in Minnesota, we had to have them in order to get paid. It's kind of amazing how quick you learn how to use that form once that's the case. But it does become easier as you do it, and we'll go through that specifics of the legalese in that forum. But when I started doing these buyer presentations early on, and there's very few things that I actually promise in this business. One of them is, it has been my experience that every time I did this with a buyer, every single time, the relationship, I got great reviews. I was addressing their fears. We were able to get projections and contracts through quicker because they understood why that was the case. We talked about buyer fears as we went through it. So we're going to talk about that right now. And one of the things that I did was, and NAR had a survey that they did, gosh, years ago. This was at least 7 or 8 years ago. And they were asking the consumers what was their biggest fear when they're buying a house, just in general. So their fears around working with the buyer's agent were 3 things. One was FOMO, which was fear of missing out, that they were going to pick the wrong buyer's agent, and they were going to be working with the agent, and that agent didn't know everything that was going on. And we've all felt that already with some of our clients. Either that or being railroaded, that they just didn't want to go out there. They just were so busy, they were just going to try to push me into the first house that they saw, and that they weren't going to have time to actually take the time to get to know if that was the right house for them. And last was overpaying. So they and that came up occasionally, but not very often, but they thought, well, we're paid on commission, so what's the incentive for him to really negotiate deeper so that I get a lower amount? So we would talk about what little difference that was and why referrals were so much more important than the $100 difference that would have been if I hadn't done the best job I could for you.
Yeah, I love it. I love like kind of knowing these 3 fears, and all of you, as you go into this, knowing these, it's kind of just hitting them head on. And that's what you're able to do in this presentation that Tom's going to take you through, because they may not say these things out loud, but this is what they're feeling. And so it's really important to know their psyche, because they may be too polite to say anything, but inside they're thinking, well, how do I know if Tom's the right agent? Because, what if he doesn't find us all the houses or show us everything? So if you know that FOMO is going to be an important part that you have to address, you can just say, here's how I make sure we see absolutely everything in your marketplace and your price point, right? You're able to hit that right on. So I absolutely love that these 3 things are what we should be focusing on. And as we move into this too, I know Tom hit on the fact that we are going to roundtable the exclusive buyer broker agreement. And I know a lot of you say it's too long, it's wordy, it's hard for the clients, but think about it. It is shorter than our listing presentation. And our listing agreement. And our listing agreement is just as wordy, has just as much legal jargon. I think what has happened is we've gotten so used to using it and how to abbreviate and articulate the sections. So I think we have to practice looking at the buyer agreement and figuring out, how do I make this as easy? Because it is a shorter agreement. May we make it shorter in the future? Possibly, but there's also real importance as to why all that language is in there. So as opposed to waiting for something shorter, my suggestion is practice. It's not that long. Get yourself comfortable around each of those paragraphs. And then you figure out, just like we do with the listing agreement, be able to present it in a way that they're comfortable with.
Perfect. So if you break this meeting down, you could do this in basically 30 minutes. And the more me and my team was doing it, the faster we got. And it was really kind of nice to be able to do that. So each section, when we were thinking about it, was how do we mitigate the fears that the three fears we were just talking to, getting them to yes, and getting the information that we needed to get across. Two real quick things before we get started was often the buyer will say, I don't have time to have a buyer interview. If you frame, this is just my experience and my learnings. I'd say I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with you before we get started. Very often they just wanted to go see the house. We've all been there. They just really want to get started. One of the ways to get around that was, if you're creating a day that you're going to go out and look at homes, schedule them for about 30-45 minutes ahead of time before the first scheduled showing, depending on what part of the Chicagoland you're in. You might have to, do that with your timing. But that way, when they get to the office, you can say, great, just so you know, here's when we're getting started. We're meeting at my office, and the first one's going to be about 45 minutes. While we're waiting, I want to just take you through a couple of things. They were sometimes a little bit not super happy about that, but as soon as we got into it and they saw the value of it, it absolutely worked. So it is worth going to that effort to make sure that you get a buyer interview with everyone. So each of these questions as we go through was meant to have an impact. The other thing I learned is you don't need to provide a solution when there's no problem to be had. So in other words, don't overdo your presentation. So and I'll give an example. Often there were people that said, oh, don't I need to sign something? Where's the buyer agreement? And I heard that yesterday in my office meeting with Winnetka agents, where that was the case. People were just ready to sign. So you don't have to overdo it either. Don't be too afraid. If they're ready to sign, and just make sure that you go through it. Review the questions as we go through this so that they come off as authentic and not rehearsed. So the more you do it, the more authentic it'll feel. It's going to be, each one of these will be slightly different based on who you're talking to. So we can get into the Greek next, which is basically the whole idea around this is to set up those first 3 minutes are when they're going to determine if they want to continue to work with you. And those first 3 minutes are the most important in the entire conversation, right? Everyone says that. So what I would do when I was an agent, I worked out of the Glenview office, and which I loved. It's a great office. And I would talk to the front desk staff and say, look, I've got Mr. and Mrs. Smith coming in about 10 minutes or in a half hour, whatever it is. Please use their name and let them know that Tom's been expecting you, and then offer them a drink. And here in the Winnetka office, they do that all the time routinely, but basically just giving them a little bit of information, just taking that one little step will make them feel very special. When they do talk to you, making sure you're asking questions like, how are you? Thank you for coming, or welcome, offer a compliment. All of these things are supposed to be done in a way that starts to open up their psyche to your presentation and make them receptive to it in nice ways. You're trying to get them to yes. And then the whole idea around this part about the fear is that they're going to feel a little bit powerless. It's like when people walk into an open house, right? They're a little nervous because they know the agent's going to either do one thing or the other. They get that they're nervous. And even if they've bought many, many times, this is a huge purchase for them. It's a change in life. It's one of the biggest things that happened to them in their lives. They're nervous, even though you're not. So let them feel like they have the power, because they do, and these questions are going to do that, and you're in control. And that's the perfect balance for them feeling like, okay, these guys got it. So then we'll just get into sort of the interview side. And this is, again, each one just takes a little bit of time. But I actually used to create a file. Here's one with my name on it because I'm so self-serving. But in it, it would basically have, I would just take a manila folder, have their name on it, have a file, and I would make it feel like I was writing down what they're doing, which is a good thing to do anyway. I have a tendency not to write things down, and I fly by the seat of my pants a little bit. This sort of made me also relax a little bit into it, understand that I have control of the situation while they have the power, because I'm asking questions and writing it down. It's just another aspect to them making feel good about it. I loved there's a whole series of questions that we have on at Academy that you can use for scripts and the rest of it. But the three that I liked personally was, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you in the buyer process? I love that because it's going to tell you so much about where they're at. If they're at 10, they could be buying today. That's where they're at. If they're at 1, then I need to spend a little bit more time why you need pre-approval letters, why you need to get your financing done, you know, so it just gives me an idea of where to focus through the day. I would ask the question of what was their experience like with their last realtor? If it's their first time working with somebody, you could say, what is your expectation of working with a realtor? I love that because it also gives you the perfect way to get a really good review at the end of the day. Because if you tell them, if they tell you what their experience was like and you can change that, or they tell you what their expectations are and you can meet that, your review is going to be amazing. It's just going to be amazing because, in fact, it was funny because I would hear them say the things that we talked about here in their review, because you're setting up what their experience is going to be like. You delivered on it, and they will literally review with those words. And then the other thing I like is how familiar the way the process works today. This is great for those people. And when they would tell you, oh, I've bought and sold houses all my life, and this is, you know, this is nothing for me. I know they're going to be the most nervous. It just works out that way. I don't know why, but maybe that's some bravado or something, but they're going to be the ones that I have to spend the most time with. But if you're familiar with the way the process works today, is a great question, because all of the NAR stuff, everything that's been out there, it lets them know that you have more information than they do in this particular process. I don't care how many times they've sold. The market's different today, and it's different than it was 2 weeks ago, just based on the competition and the price point they're looking for, right? So again, it's putting you in control. They have the power. And then I would just go over the overview. I heard some of the people, the comments were asking about this, but I would have a buyer packet for them that you've created. And that's something that you can practice, that you can put together and have for yourself, right? It has your own branding in it. It just makes you look really put together. We have those great buyer kits, those folders. You can change them out, put your own things in there. You just look like a star, right? And nobody else is doing that probably. So you can have information about the current market conditions, latest reports. I would actually use even the custom market reports. Those are amazing because you could actually show what's happening in the market that they're looking at. We do that for sellers often. You know, we put those custom market reports together for them, but this is a great buyer tool, and you can go in there, you can circle the neighborhood that they're looking at. You can really do these really professionally, and we didn't even have what I was selling. I'm a tiny bit jealous of them. And then you've got obviously you've got all the other resources available too, with Broker Metrics and any of the other things that you typically use. You know, that we can pull reports on what's taking place. This is where you would put the sample contracts, the addendum, and the disclosures. So somebody was asking about that. So you can have contracts. You can show the addendum that goes along with the contract that is going to be asking for financing if they're not producing enough, you know, on their on their co-op, and then all the disclosures so that they have it ahead of time. I had a letter about what our pre-approval needs are. You know, the fact that if you've got cash, it's not going to be an excuse for a lowball, but it does mean that we're going to have pre-approvals or back statements or whatever it's going to look like. If you're getting a loan, what that looks like. And then I actually included the exclusive buyer broker agreement in there. The reason for that is it just makes it a part of the process, right? It's already part of what we do. It's something that they're going to be looking at. They can see it ahead of time. And I'll take you through how we asked for it in here, but basically all the materials right there. I'd say, you know, I won't be going through this with you right now unless you'd like me to, but I'd love you to look through it, become familiar with it, and then we'll be able to take it from there.
And what I used to do both with my sellers and my buyers, you know, when I would do this buyer consultation, you know, the samples that I would bring, I would actually highlight some of the most important things because, you know, and it's nice because, you know, Don wrote either write a sample or fill it in if you have a sample for them. But I think if you're kind of highlighting and even just having a little note or annotate it with a sticky, like this is important to review, you know, make sure that you take a look at this. I think when you kind of present them with a document that's marked up that way, it also shows your expertise of really knowing the document well and what it says, but you're also even guiding them at that point to say, hey, don't miss out on this part, because this I want to make sure that you understand, right? There's again, a method to your madness, and that you obviously are showing that this is something you're really comfortable with and that you've done before. So just a thought as you are presenting those things to your buyers.
Absolutely. And we'll go through when you can present the buyer broker agreement. The idea around this is that this meeting is explaining, is basically explaining agency, right? That was what we always were supposed to do whenever we work with the buyer and we started to hear about any kind of financial terms or anything that was taking place, we had to explain agency. As we go through this, the buyer broker agreement can be signed a little bit later as of right now. So it's not the expectation that the very first time you talk to them that they're going to sign this the expectation hasn't changed. You have to explain agency, which is what buyer agency is.
And Beverly had a question in the chat, Tom, and maybe you can just answer, so you don't have to have the buyer sign the buyer broker agreement during the consultation. Can you
That's
give a
correct.
little bit of the script that you've used before when you go through all of the documents and you present the exclusive buyer broker agreement? Because I like how you worded it.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically when I had all these documents and I would show them how they worked, as I talked about the buyer agency agreement, I would say, look, it is an expectation that we have to sign this, but I don't want you to sign it right now. We're just getting to know each other. So what I'd like to do is take you through my process, how I work, so you get an opportunity to see me and how I do my job. We'll go out on Saturday and we're going to go see 5 houses. And at the end of it, what you see, what I've picked, how I've talked about the homes, how I've presented them, how I've taken you through this experience. At the end of the day, my expectation is on Saturday, you will sign it right there, on the hood of your car or whatever we need to do. But that the expectation is that at the end of the day, that'll be when it's signed. If you don't want to sign it at that point, no harm, no foul. I'm just gonna, we'll just call it quits and you can work with someone that you would like to do it. There's nicer ways to say that. But basically the expectation is that that's what we're going to be doing to continue to work together. But you can sort of do a try before you buy. And I'm not expecting you to do this before you've even gotten a chance to know me. I just like to know that, but I am going to set the expectation is by the first day that we go out, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's something a lot of agents can get comfortable with because you're giving them an opportunity to review it, but you're also setting the expectation that this does need to be signed after
Yeah.
a certain
Right.
point. Yeah.
And that's really how I did it when I worked I was with Edina Realty in Edina, Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis. And because we had to have those, we all got very, very comfortable in using them. And I will tell you 2 things that comes out of it. Just this is a little bit side note, but virtually all issues around procuring cause are done. They're gone. They do not hear those cases because it's been established right from the beginning. And it's really nice. And the other part was you don't have people kind of cheating on you. I don't know a better word, but sometimes we've been with those buyers when you find out, oh, wait, they were working with someone else as well, or they went and bought it on their own. Those issues have also stopped completely. So it's just sort of there are some nice things that come out of it when you start getting comfortable with it.
Yep, totally.
Right. So then I would actually take them through, so that I just went through all the documents and the expectations there. Then I would talk to you a little bit how I go about my selection process, right? So when asking questions and they're coming up, by this point, you probably know, but you can ask the question, I need a 4-bedroom home. I want da, 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 da. But I would actually get to the whys they need it rather than the whats, because they're giving you facts based on what they know on how to go through the process. We know a totally different way of doing it, right? So we see homes all day long. And how many people have you been working with that just like, oh, I just love looking at homes, this is so much fun. And, and it is, but often if you get to the why, this was big during COVID as well. They'd say, I need a 4-bedroom home. And as you ask, why do you need 4 bedrooms? Something would come out of it. Well, my husband works at home and we're just going to convert one of them to an office. Or we both work from home and we need 2 different spaces so that we're not on top of each other. Well, that kind of opens up a lot of because homes are scarce these days. So it starts to open up other things you can look at. Well, maybe they need a den, or maybe there's a loft space, or maybe there's a small home office or a nursery room that was used in a particular apartment, where it was just so small that that's what it was used for in the past. It might work as an office. So it just opens up a lot more for you to be a consultant rather than an order taker. And you're really working with them on how to develop that process. Then also, this is again hitting the FOMO part that they're going to miss out on something. Here are all the resources that are available to me. I've got properties. We're the largest in the Chicagoland area. Every brokerage firm has some kind of superlative that says we're the biggest, baddest, fastest, whatever it's going to be. The advantage for being the largest is that we have the most agents that are looking out for each other, and also with the agent app giving us the opportunity to see pocket listings that other agencies just don't have. That's just the case of being really large. Zenlist, and we have the access to that. TAN, which is the top agent network. If you're not a member, you can still be posting on there if you've got a home. So you can utilize that if you need to. MLS is obvious. New listings as they come on, you're going to be aware of them from your office meetings. pocket listings from office meetings or talking, we're using the agent app, and then private listing network, the PLN, which often they don't really understand the differences between those. But by at least explaining that you're looking at all of these things and you're really well connected and you're doing these things, the FOMO is gone. You've got the best agent to be able to find this out. And then this is just for elimination. This was back when I was selling originally in 2015. We had the exact opposite of the issue we have right now. There was so much property on the North Shore that you almost did not want to take a listing. It's kind of completely the opposite of what it is today. And in that process, you might see 20 homes. I mean, it was really a completely different market, right? And so even if you're seeing 5 homes, the one thing that I did that kind of made my clients like working with me is that I would do this elimination process at the end of each property. I would say, how did this compare to the one before? So that it's still fresh in our minds before we got to the next house, because what inevitably started happening is you'd get to the end of the day and it would be like, now, which one was the one with the red carpet or da 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 da? It's going to be really, really difficult to, keep that process going. So the idea around it was I would just close the page and say, let's fold that page in half. And this is our best right now. And by the end of the day, we'd end up with one property that we thought was the best. They might still want to go back and think about the others, but it really did help that. The next day when I'd go out, 5 more houses, I would still, one that they liked the most from the day before, I'd also include that in the tour, just say, how did this compare? And it just really helped craft people who are sometimes all over the place on where they want to go and bringing them closer together so that the process was smoother. And it made it seem like I had a process, which is also important. And that was often what I got in my reviews. That Tom had a great process for getting us through this, right? So that's what each time you're trying to help them through that process.
Yeah. Now today it's like, do you like this one or this one? Which one do you want?
And back now.
Totally.
It'll change again.
Yep.
So the financing, actually, I would actually then just spend a couple minutes on this. Often, even if you feel like they really know what they're talking about, it's really surprising they don't. Or when you take them, there was a couple of nuances that they just didn't understand, and you just, again, became a great resource for them. So the idea that, they're paying cash, which we see a lot of cash offers on the North Shore, it's overwhelming almost, but it's not a ticket for lowball offers. And we've had that before. They say, well, I'm paying cash, so that, this should be a big deal. They're all cash at closing, ultimately. So you want to explain that to them that, it does put you ahead of everyone else. It's not necessarily going to get you a deal. And that it will require a proof of funds letter. That's important because sometimes people don't understand. They think they take it personally a little bit. Like, you don't trust that they don't have the cash. Most people are okay with it, but if you explain it now rather than when they put the offer, it just makes it smoother and you don't have to worry about that. In acquiring a loan, I would talk about the pre-approval letter and why it's important we do it right now. We have to have that before we even really want to get too far down the road. They're very easy to get and don't take very long. And then I would explain the 3 different loan processes, just very top line, that you've got big banks, people like Chase and B of A. And I remember back in the days, wasn't that long ago, 9 years ago, that if you saw a Chase or B of A loan, you would just like cringe because it was going to be super hard to get it done properly because they just didn't have that as their primary source of income as a bank. They've gotten much, much better. Explaining that isn't their primary area, and just because you have a portfolio a portfolio with them, you just want to make sure that you're talking to a couple of different people, not just the bank. And that the types of loan providers, besides big banks, was that there are mortgage lenders that are specific to just doing this as their job. People like Proper Rate, and why that's important because they actually do a really good job for us. But that's their primary experience, and often they can do better at getting us deals and getting the deal done than some of the others. And then mortgage brokers, those are the individuals that go out there and they just broker the deal between all the resources available to them. Some of them are very good and they can be amazing, and some of them aren't as good. So just being sure that they are picking the right person. And in fact, it's really interesting. This is the most expensive part of this whole process. It is not the real estate agent on either side. The most expensive part of the whole process is the mortgage, and they spend the least amount of time thinking about that. So it's just really amazing to me that they don't, and I would bring that up, that it's not my fee that's going to be ultimately over the course of your loan or the course of this home. It's just making sure that they understand what those all are. And then the home sale contingency, if they have a home to sell, just explaining the differences between them, that if you've got a home to sell and you haven't even picked a broker and haven't put it on the market, it's almost worthless, all the way to a home closed contingency where you're all the way through the all through AI and you're on the other side of it. That's almost as good as cash, you know, that's good. And then wrapping up, and this is how easy this is on how to go about this. It takes about 30 minutes, but this is the level setting, and this is the last opportunity for you to actually wrap this whole thing around the three fears that they had in the beginning, right? So one of them is asking if you find the right, I love this question. If you find the right home, what will you do? Because now you've just opened up a part of the brain that thinks, well, if I find it today, I'm going to move today. Now, most people have to do that anyway because there's so few homes. But when we become more of a balanced market, which we will, this is going to be a question that's going to be important for them. And then what are the two things that are important to you in a great client experience? So you started off in the beginning and what was it like? What's your expectations? Now you've kind of gone through this and their minds are sort of like really thinking about it. The juices are flowing. At the end of it, you can say, what are the two things that would make a great client experience for you? Again, you're setting up the expectation that you're going to deliver that. You do deliver it, you get great reviews. And then this is a part that I always said too, was the fear of being railroaded. So I wanted to address that. And I would say that we will always take our time and you'll never feel rushed or pushed. I would just say those words out loud, that I'm not going to rush you or push you. Even though we're feeling that way, I want to stop, slow down, and say that to them. And then say, but when we find the right home, I'm going to be moving at the speed of light, because the moment we find that home, somebody else is going to find that home. So by having done all this work ahead of time, having all our ducks in a row and ready to go, we can take our time, we can find the right home, but we will be ready to have to go at lightning speed and make sure that we get that home for you and before anyone else does. Really,
I love it. I
yes.
love the level setting piece. Like the questions are perfect. And I just, you know, the thing that I don't think we do enough of as agents is that the consumer is too polite to object or say things out loud, but these are all the concerns and things that they're harboring inside, right? So by going through this level setting, it's like you're forcing that conversation and you're basically answering the questions that they're asking internally, which I think are genius. So I love it. All right, so I don't know if there's some questions in the chat, but what we want to talk about is, first of all, that was it. That was the 30 minutes. Those were the 6 steps. And as Tom mentioned, there are a ton of other questions that you can take a look at. We will have, you know, the attachments and the materials available for you. But what I liked is this felt really simple and really easy and really doable. And I think once you try it, and it's funny because Tom talks about he had a team and he would do this all the time. And he would have some team members, I think, at a point where they were like, do I really need to do this? Let me just take them on out. And they would say over and over again, the difference between if they took time to do this 30-minute consultation, how much better it went, how much the relationship was so much better and it was so much more secure through the finish versus skipping this, going right to showing them properties and then dealing with a lot of that emotional stuff kind of along the way. So Tom, I don't know if you want, but I just
I mean, it is really critical. And I think what happens is it moves us from, by meeting in our office, which we have really nice offices, right? It moves us away from that weird back of the head feeling some people have that we work out of our car, we do this as a hobby. I'm just dropping off the kids, I'm going to show you a house. And if all we're doing is meeting them at the home and opening the door, that's what we just became. We just opened the door, right? We do so much more than that. And I was just talking to an agent who's on here today, this morning, on a deal she was doing, and we said the same thing. It's like we do so much more than just showing a home, and it's like, it's just sometimes we get in our own way by letting them direct it. And so the idea around this is keeping control, letting them have the power. But that doesn't mean they get to bully us around or tell us how they want to make it work. But they don't. If we're actually showing our value, we're treating it professionally, we're doing these things from the beginning, it just makes the whole relationship different. And we really felt the difference.
Yeah, and not being defensive, but really also knowing your value and just intrinsically what you've done. I mean, how many stories can you have? You probably have one for every finger, maybe even every toe of how you ended up saving a deal, walking a buyer through something super stressful. What I would harness is having those stories on the ready so that when you're in a conversation and you're able to say, you know what, I worked with a buyer who was in a really similar situation that you're in a few months ago, and this is how we addressed it. To me, that's far more powerful than saying, did you know these are the 137 things I do as a buyer's agent? Like, let's stop line iteming what we do, because we're so much more valuable than that. So instead of, we call it show, don't tell, right? Don't tell them that you're great. Don't tell them all of these line item things. Show them through storytelling, through this 30-minute consultation. Guarantee you will see the difference in how they respond to you.
And I think, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just gonna say, the thing about that too, when we do get into line items, we're moving into tasks, and we're so much more than tasks, because then again, that puts us in a position of just being their manager. I want you to go do this, I want you to go do that. By keeping the balance equal, what we're saying is, we're not talking about tasks, we're talking about outcomes. The outcome is you're gonna get in the home you love at the best possible terms. All the rest of it is my tools. These are the things are my tools. These are the things I get to do. You don't get to play there. So it just kind of really helps us really keep the level playing field. And it's really hard with buyers out of everybody.
And the other thing I say too is, like, sometimes we almost get penalized when we make things look too easy. And I say, we're kind of like ducks sitting on the water, right? Or swans, right? Swans on the water that look so regal and they look like they have nothing better going on. But, if they have to get somewhere fast, how fast those little, fins are going underneath, all their work is under the water and behind the scenes, right? And that's kind of like how we are. The better we are, the easier we make it for them to get to the finish line. And that's, again, where our value comes into play, because we know how to avoid the landmines, right? So remembering all of that. And I think that, saying all of this and sharing all of this is so important, because this is how you have to have, and this is the mindset that you need, because you have to believe that a buyer is better off working with you than on their own. And the thing is if you don't believe it, then guess what? They're not going to believe it either. So it's really getting to that. And if you're feeling like I don't do enough or my process isn't clear, guess what? Now is the time to tighten all of that up, and practice makes perfect, right? The other thing, we know the elephant in the room. They're going to ask questions about compensation. So if you're nervous about it, get to those round tables and practice what you're going to say. It's going to come up. And again, if you did not see yesterday's all call, take a minute to watch it. Michelle McManus has been in the business just 2 years, and the way she approaches it isn't perfect. It's super authentic, and it's charming, and it's engaging. And her clients are like, because her whole attitude is, I'm right there with you. And so they're like, great, let's go. So, you don't have to be this regal agent. Like, just be yourself and be earnest and show your commitment to wanting the best for them. That's going to be a huge differentiator when you have these conversations, and be appreciative of them asking the questions. They're asking questions because they really want to learn more and they want to make a good decision. And you should be okay with that. And again, back to using stories and examples that show your value. You've got to just be really comfortable with it. And then being really comfortable, we got a lot of this in the chat earlier today, which is that the exclusive buyer broker agreement is too long and too confusing. All right, so is our listing agreement. And again, the odds of that changing and getting simpler, I wouldn't wait for it. What I would do is I would read it, not one time. I would read it maybe 5 times, 10 times, and I would write notes on the side and figure out, how do I make this an easier explanation so that I can, at a high level, go through and kind of talk about each section and then give them the opportunity to read it on their own. So, part of it being so legalese is because it is a legal document there to protect us and them. So get comfortable with it, because it is going to be a required form. It is a required form. So the beauty of it is everyone's going to have to use it. The question is, how good of an agent will you be to really know how to master the conversation with it? And that's your opportunity right now. And so what we also are going to say is, don't get so hung up on every single bit of this exclusive buyer broker agreement. There are 2 parts that we know are the biggest elephant in the room, right? The compensation, how do we talk about it? Clearly, directly, and honestly. And then we talk about the term and really get a good understanding of, making sure they know, just like in our listing agreement, what's our term in our listing agreement? It's 1 year, it's 12 months. Do we sometimes make an accommodation? Maybe, but rarely, because we just don't know how long it's going to take, especially for a buyer in this market. It may take a year of working together to get them to the finish line. And for the compensation, I saw in the chat as well, just being really comfortable. I loved how Michelle McManus, again, said it yesterday when she kind of talked about her script. She said, look, my fee is 2.5%. And the odds are that a seller is going to offer that 2.5%. But in the instance that they are offering less, we're going to work through this together, because we will work through this together to make sure that I get paid for my expertise and that we get you the house that you love. There are some different scenarios and different ways that we can approach this, but I want you to know that I'm in this with you and we are going to get you to the finish line together. But you need to get a fabulous house. And in order to work with me, I just need to make sure that I'm going to be able to get paid. I think there is
one of the things I'm really excited about all of this, and I know this is going to sound a little Pollyanna because there's a lot of change, there's a lot of uncertainty. One thing that's really going to for sure come out of this is this is the only industry I've ever worked in where we can work for somebody for a year and then not get paid because they went around our back or they decided that they were going to do something different or use somebody different. It's the only industry in the world, and the expectation that we work for free for that long, right? I loved everything you just said, because what this is starting to do is it elevates us from being a realtor, which, remember, that was like we had to say the word realtor and do all those things, and I'm not putting that down because I think it's important. However, we're really moving to being truly an advisor and a professional and somebody that really is worth the pay that we were in the past being thought of as being just sort of a door opener. So I love that this elevates our profession in a way that is long due, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the last thing I'm going to say, because I've heard this a lot, yes, buyers are in a tough market right now. They're overpaying, they're overextending, they have to throw everything out there, but don't feel badly that they also have to figure out how to get you paid for the services you are rendering. Because the thing that you need to remember is that if they didn't have you, they wouldn't get the house. If they didn't have you, they probably would have overpaid more. If they didn't have you, they wouldn't have realized that the house had issues, in the back left-hand corner, and that's something that needs to be looked at, right? So let's not apologize for the fee that we are charging. We know we feel bad for these buyers, but the thing is you would feel worse for a buyer going at it alone without the right representation. So we need to get ourselves out of that mindset. We're smart, we're knowledgeable, we're helping them invest in their largest asset. The home for most Americans is the largest wealth builder for them. So your little 2.5% in the short term is going to end up creating great success for them in the long term. So just make sure you know that and you get your head around it and you believe it. Tom, are there any things in the chat that we want to address? I feel like we got through a lot of them, but I didn't know if there was anything we should do before.
I think a great explanation is maybe in the roundtable meetings that we've got, they're already started, and we're watching for our offices we were talking about, but and I think it's a good idea, is breaking down the buyer broker agreement so that we have layman terms and almost like call outs for each paragraph, which we've done with the listing agreement. And I think that is something that we could do very easily in the roundtable, so that everybody has an opportunity to feel really comfortable about explaining each one of those elements, because they're not complicated once we do that. So I think that was a great suggestion.
Yep, I love it. I love it. Okay, great. Well, you know what, Tom, we did it. We got this done in an hour. So we want to talk about next steps for everyone as you jump off and hopefully go and grab lunch. But in-office roundtable meetings, they are happening, as Tom mentioned. They've already been scheduled. They're going to continue. Jump into one. It's going to be 10 to 12 people in there. Role play, practice, ask questions, get uncomfortable, because the more you practice in your safety zone with others, the more confident you're going to be. And just try it. Just jump off the deep end, have the conversation, because every time you do it, it's going to get so much easier. And then, role play in the office. Feel free to Zoom with your managing broker in practice. We are here for you. Our goal is to give you these tools in this webinar and then allow you to go ahead and try and execute on your own. So that's it. On that note, Tom, are you buying me lunch? Because I'm hungry.
Yes, absolutely. I'm starving. Thank you all very much. I'll just say, as someone who's done this many, many times in the past as an agent, I promise you, it does get easier, and it just makes you feel really good, frankly, even about your own job, like the more we do this. So.
And feel free to share successes with us. Once you do it, we want to hear from you.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well, you all make it a great day. We will have this recording up in Ad Academy with all the materials by tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out and good luck out there. See you later.
Thank you very much.